So, as I've mentioned a couple times, I've been reading this particular book, The Deepest Well, Healing the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity, uh, primarily as part of we haven't met yet. I think it's got like a one-shot book club for the community that's involved in One Place Family Justice Center. And what they have noticed as kind of first responders in the domestic violence and sexual assault realm is that so many people that they see come through their door as adults are people who were affected by similar circumstances as children. And they've been looking at, well, what can we do to alleviate this? How can we put in a pattern break? How can we interrupt this cycle? And so the research and the experiences that Dr. Harris talks about in her book are they're not only valuable for that effort, but God, it's such a relief as a person who is, I was one of the kids, right, who had adverse childhood experiences, had a bunch. And it's nice to know that, this hasn't all been my fault. So what this really does is to me, it kind of it changes the way I look at what I'm going to do going forward. Now, thankfully, some of the things that are good for you that will help us as adults to recover are habits I've already gotten into for one reason or another, especially through recovering from alcoholism, which is one of the big symptoms that is displayed by people who were children who had adverse childhood experiences. So when we take a look at it, this is stuff that, in many ways, a lot of us probably thought, well, yeah, it was kind of, my childhood was really rough around the edges, but, I wasn't the only person. And these problems I'm having, that maybe they don't have anything to do with it, or, maybe it's just my fault. Maybe the fact that I'm an alcoholic is my fault. Maybe the fact that, whatever it might be, maybe the reason that I went from wearing husky jeans as a kid to, having to really watch sugar right now, and in some cases watching it, as it's going in, which I've been really trying hard not to, but that's actually a physical symptom of something that happened a long time ago that I had no control over. And, I have to realize that there's actual medical connections that I was not aware of. So what happens, and the way that it works, is the adverse childhood experiences that we're going to find out about in a little bit. They actually have medical effects on our bodies as well as on our brains, which eventually, of course, affects how our mental state, our emotional state, and even, I guess, to some extent, it affects our spiritual life. But certainly, this is something that can actually get into our DNA, and it can change the way that our DNA replicates and keeps us healthy or not for a lifetime. And it can have effects on things that we might never have realized, like heart disease, strokes, cancer, diabetes, as it says on the slide there, even Alzheimer's disease. All these things can be affected by things that happened when, we were 5 or 7 or 9 or whatever. So I was very tempted to play the entire TED Talk that Dr. Harris gave, and I urge you, if you are interested by this stuff, and if if you're one of us, that you just look her up on YouTube and watch it. It's like a 16-minute TED Talk, and I'm going to do my best to share the parts of the talk, or, like kind of go between some different pieces of the talk that I downloaded. So this is going to be an experiment, and we'll see how this goes. All right. So I'm going to stop that share, and I'm going to try this, and boom. And let's try this.
In the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente discovered an exposure that dramatically increased the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. In high doses, it affects brain development, the immune system, hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Folks who are exposed in very high doses have triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer, and a 20-year difference in life expectancy. And yet doctors today are not trained in routine screening or treatment. Now, the exposure I'm talking about is not a pesticide or a packaging chemical. It's childhood trauma. Okay, what kind of trauma am I talking about here? I'm not talking about failing a test or losing a basketball game. I am talking about threats that are so severe or pervasive that they literally get under our skin and change our physiology. Things like abuse or neglect, or growing up with a parent who struggles with mental illness or substance dependence.
Okay, now that's kind of the definition. But I want to jump ahead and go to where she talks about what a lot of people are probably familiar with hearing about these days, and that is, problem children allegedly having ADHD.
A lot of kids were being referred to me for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when I actually did a thorough history and physical, what I found was that for most of my patients, I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD. Most of the kids I was seeing had experienced such severe trauma that it felt like something else was going on. Somehow, I was missing something important.
So, when we talk about what's the so what are the things that happen to us, she gets into, a little later on, she gets into talking about some of the consequences of this, and I want to play you a little bit of that as well.
2 things. Number 1, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America.
Some of those numbers are really mind-boggling. And I want to go to the place where she talks about how it's not just behaviorally linked, it's actually medically linked. And if you want to get deeply into this, she does a really good job in her book of explaining it. But I wanted to share this piece with you.
The science comes in. We now understand better than we ever have before how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior, and that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging.
Yeah. So, again, the rest of this is great too. But I didn't want to subject you to too much of a long video all at one time. So I highly recommend going out there, Nadine Burke Harris, and you can search for her on YouTube, or if you go to the TED Talk website, you can also find it there. I want to go back into the slideshow now. Now that we kind of have a little bit of a background on what it is we're talking about here. So I had a feeling everybody was going to ask the question, well, how do I know? What is it? So what I've done here is over the next 5 slides, I have inserted the screening test that they give people to find out what their ACE score is. So if you would like to, and I found it pretty revealing, you can go ahead and kind of take the test along with us here. So, and these are important things, and every piece of this is important. So this part, prior to your 18th birthday, which is the condition of all these questions, right? Prior to your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid you might be physically hurt? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Prior to your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? If yes, enter 1. Prior to your 18th birthday, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch or fondle their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? If yes, enter 1. Did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? If yes, enter 1. Prior to your 18th birthday, did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? If yes, enter 1. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? If yes, enter 1. Number 7, was your mother or stepmother often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes or often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or a knife? If yes, enter 1. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? If yes, enter 1. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? If yes, enter 1. Finally, did a household member go to prison? If yes, enter 1. So you add up all of the answers that you answered yes to, and you get your ACE score. And, the score is nothing to be ashamed of. As Dr. Harris pointed out, most of us, most of the population that they've tested so far, about 2/3 have a score higher than 0, right? So there is that, that lucky 36% who couldn't answer any of those questions yes, and God love them, good on them. But for most of us, the answer is going to be a counting number. And for one in 8, it is going to be 4 or more. I count myself in that population. It is absolutely devastating, the effect that this exposure as a child has on our health and our health outcomes as adults. And I've got some slides. These are just snapshots that I took of a really great infographic that actually, fleshed out the things a little bit better, but I couldn't capture it, right? But anyway, just to give you an idea of the effects that these things have, okay? These are some effects on behaviors and health. And all these little dots that you see are, there's some behaviors in there like lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, and missed work. There are also physical and mental health outcomes in there, including severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, and broken bones, of all things. Okay, so this is with 0. Okay, this little galaxy of bubbles is, those roughly 1/3 of the population that don't have any ACEs. All right, now if people who said yes to just 1, okay, we can see that some of their chances have gotten a lot bigger for some of these unpleasant outcomes. All right, that's just 1. Now we go to 2. And you can see how some of these have gotten, rather larger. At 3, it's like alcoholism, suicidality, drug use, depression, heart disease, all kinds of really serious things are starting to become, fairly large. And, then we get to 4 or more, and it gets pretty devastating. Some of the numbers that they came across, and these aren't small studies. The initial study that they looked at was 17,500 people, and it wasn't all people at like the bottom end of the economic spectrum or all people of color. It was actually done through a healthcare system. So these were people who actually had health insurance. And they were 70% white and 70% college educated, okay? And they're showing these kinds of statistics. Well, every follow-on study that they've done, in addition, has pretty much corroborated these numbers. And the numbers surprisingly come in from across the spectrum at about the same, ratios in terms of as the ACEs number goes higher, what is the likelihood of stroke, cancer, whatever. So it really does have a tremendous effect. And, of course, then there's, the final outcome is pretty significant. People who have 0 ACEs live on average about 20 years longer than people with 6 or more. That's huge. So what are some of the things that we take away from this? Well, the first thing we take away is something that I know I've carried around with me, and I have a feeling I'm not alone in this, right? Is for much of my life, I have probably felt guilt and shame about things that were not my fault, and I struggle with them to this day, and I'm 60. And these are things that they're inside my body now. It's not just, that I'm a knucklehead and that I can't learn to live a different way. This is stuff that gets into our immune systems. It gets into our hormones, and it even gets, down to the DNA level of how our cells replicate, right? That's not our fault. It's just not our fault. So when we talk about toxic stress response, okay, what does that actually mean? And these are pretty much straight from the horse's mouth, right? I got this stuff straight from Dr. Harris or from some other websites that I did some research on. So the deal with toxic stress response, not just stress response, right? Toxic stress response can occur when a child experiences strong, frequent, and/or prolonged adversity, such as physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, caregiver substance abuse or mental illness, exposure to violence, and/or the accumulated burdens of family economic hardship without adequate adult support. This kind of prolonged activation of the stress response systems can disrupt the development of brain architecture and all kinds of other stuff. Laura used to be a children's minister. I mean, she did it for like 6 years. And she saw kids that were, dealing with toxic stress. And what she noticed, and she could tell us all, a lot of stories about this, is that if a kid had one adult that actually gave a shit about them, they had a shot. But it was the kids that didn't have any adults in their lives that were pretty much doomed to, just repeat the cycle, to just go back into the meat grinder.
Well, it's astonishing how many of those kids didn't have one adult.
Right.
They didn't have the grandparent or the aunt or the whatever who cared enough to take care of them or to help them in any way, Yeah.
Yeah, that's just so sad. So, as we've probably all sort of intuited, if not, actually admitted, sometimes, stress is actually a good thing, that it can help us grow. I mean, Laura stresses her body like nobody's business, going out there, running miles and miles up and down hills and stuff. And that's how she gets stronger, But at a certain point, it's the prolonged activation of stress response systems. Like she's talking about, it's one thing to encounter the bear in the woods once, but when you come home and, you live with the bear, your response system is going all the time. I remember growing up, my sister and I could tell how drunk my dad was by the sound of his tires pulling into our driveway. That's hypervigilance, and that's toxic stress response right there. So, okay, if we're parents and we think that our kids are being subjected to a lot of stress, what are some things that we can do? And I've got the reminder there is lick your pups, and what that refers to is they found out doing a study with rats. And baby rats called pups, okay, is that the pups would get stressed when they were removed from the nest area, and the researchers would, check them out and, measure whatever they measured and do the things that researchers do with baby rats, right? So that would stress the pups. It would scare them. So they would put the pups back into the nest with their mothers. Well, some of the mothers were what they called high licking mothers or high lickers. And they would like really, go to town on licking their pups and comforting them. And that, that was, so they did that. Some of the other mothers were like, yeah, you're back. Okay. And they weren't high lickers. And as they continued to study these populations of rats, they were noticing actual physiological differences between the pups that got licked a lot and the pups that didn't get licked a lot. So, being researchers, they're like, okay, let's just see how this all works out. So in addition to studying the difference between the highly licked pups and the unlicked pups, they thought, what happens if we do some swippy swapping around? I mean, is this all just genetic, or, how does this work? So they took some pups from the mothers that licked a lot and swapped them out with the mothers that didn't lick very much. And, they discovered that, yeah, there is some nurture along with the nature, that once the pups that hadn't been getting licked a lot started getting licked more, that their physiologies started recovering, right? And then not only that, but the pups, even pups that were born to like non-high licker mothers, if they were placed with a high licker mother, when they got older and had pups of their own, they became, or were more likely to become, high licker mothers themselves. So there's an epigenetic effect as well as a genetic effect in this that happens. So when we look at, okay, so we're not going to lick our kids, right? But what does that mean? Well, we're going to nurture and protect them as much as possible. We're going to get out and we're going to move and we're going to play with them. We're going to make eye contact with them. If we screw up, we're going to say we're sorry to them. We're going to give them nice, 20-second plus hugs. Let them really feel good and safe and wrapped up and loved. And we're going to, chill out with them. We're going to find the good things in their lives and help them notice those. We need to be there. We can help them express their sad, mad, and hard feelings. And that's a tough one, because most of the time when kids are upset, we want them to be quiet and be happy. And if you've ever watched Inside Out, the Pixar movie, we got to let sad out. Sad is useful. Sad's good. Sad's part of the team, right? As tough as that is sometimes. And we have to be willing to keep learning. So many of us are beyond that, or, we either don't have kids or our kids are, they're off there doing their own things. But we are still adults who were, kids who had adverse childhood experiences, like me, right? I'm on that spectrum. So what do I do? Is there any way that I can, any way I can lick my own pup, as it were? So,
Oh my God, please never say that again.
Sorry. And why are we talking about this in church? Well, if our mission is practicing love, seeking truth, and demanding justice, in order to do that, I think it helps us to know how we got to where we are. And this is so widespread. I mean, this isn't just me. It's not just, some of us on our island here. It's 2/3 of the population, right? It's a part of how we got to where we are. And if we want to get from where we are to where we want to go to be in the kingdom, then we need to know how we got where we are. And the really big thing, though, the real reason that I thought, okay, I'll talk about this in church, is that we are part of the cure, or part of, we're part of the treatment, at least. About half, or at least we can be. All right. So here's the deal. When, she writes about what can we do as adults to undo some of the damage, Dr. Burke says this: sleep, mental health, healthy relationships, exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness. We saw in our patients that these 6 things were critical for healing. as important, the literature provided evidence of why these things were effective. Fundamentally, they all targeted the underlying biological mechanism, a dysregulated stress response system, and the neurologic, endocrine, and immune disruptions that ensued. So those 6 things: sleep, mental health, healthy relationships, exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness. And you'll notice that I've put 3 of those 6 in, I've highlighted them, right? Why is that? It's because we can deal with those. We can make them part of our experience as a spiritual community. And I think it's some of these things, it's like really important to be in spiritual community to be able to address. Mental health even, it's funny. I never really looked at it this way, but back when I was at the Unity Church, we used to occasionally, John, the drummer, would be gone, and we would bring in, Steve would bring in this one particular drummer named Michael. And it's probably the 2nd or 3rd time Michael was there when I was doing the talk. And Michael came up to me after the service was over with, and he said, God, he said, this is like the mental health church. And he said it in a good way, not, it wasn't disparaging at all. He was very impressed. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, well, yeah, there are a lot of the things that we teach that do kind of help clear out the noggin. And, some of the practices included things like affirmative prayer. Now, affirmative prayer is not supplicative prayer. Supplicative prayer is like, oh, please, God, please, please. If you just get me out of this, I'll never blah, blah, blah again, right? Affirmative prayer is more like, wow, thank you in advance. I know that, this good thing is, like whether I am healthy and whole and complete, or I have the absolute perfect relationship, or I have the perfect job. It's kind of like I'm affirming it in advance and I'm keeping it positive instead of panic stricken. Denials, and by denials, I don't mean unhealthy, like denial of reality, like, hey, let's say if my legs were amputated, I wouldn't say, oh yes, I have perfectly good legs. They're fine. I can, run and dance. But it's what a healthy denial is. That doesn't have power over me or my experience. Yeah, I may have lost my legs, but you know what? I'm not going to let that run my life. That is not the boss of me. I can get along just fine. And then the affirmation is more like yeah, I'm getting along just fine. I am fully capable of living a perfectly great life, even if I have to learn how to walk on skis or whatever it might be. These are all ways that we can help retrain our brain into living more healthily. Right? Healthy relationships, and that's really, I think that's the reason we're all here, right? Some of you guys may like listening to me talk, but one of the big reasons I think that we're together is because we love being together. We love being in relationship. This is the Pew Research Center was asking people why attend church. 57% of them said to be part of a community of faith. They want to be in community with like-minded individuals. They want to be able to share with other people. This is important to us. We're social animals. Even introverts like me are wired to need other people. And I know that sometimes, even though it feels like pulling my fingernails across a chalkboard, that when I open up to other people, it is enormously gratifying and enormously helpful. So, there's that. And then finally, mindfulness. And this is where I think we really, sort of shine. Because we really try to teach self-awareness and forgiveness, and then, simply good practice like meditation. My God. I put my favorite meditation app up here. If you haven't already downloaded the Insight Meditation Timer, boy, I strongly recommend it. And start off, don't even try to reinvent the wheel. Just use one of the guided meditations. And you can even search by how long. It's like, I only want 5 minutes today. Okay. You can put that in your search screen and come up with 5-minute meditations about, like whatever it is you want to meditate on today. I think you guys have heard me tell the story before that, at the end of my first deployment, I was being interviewed by some radio stations back in West Virginia, where I grew up. And as a sort of a warm-up, the public affairs sergeant that was working the equipment was asking me a couple of questions just to kind of get me loosened up. And he said, "So, Chief, how did you get through this deployment?" The first word out of my mouth was meditation. Because I'd made it a practice like as soon as I could, once we got into a regular battle rhythm, that instead of going to the chow hall for lunch every day, I'd go back to my hooch and I would just drink a shake, and then I would meditate for half an hour. And boy, did it make a big difference. I mean, Chief, after his half-hour meditation, was a whole lot better to deal with than, Chief without his meditation. So it's a game changer. It really is. But, like anything else, start small, but start, and this is something that we do, and we practice it. I mean, that's one of the reasons I still do little meditations, even though we're online, is just to kind of make sure that we all meditate a little bit. So it's good stuff. So, what our bottom line as adults who are survivors of adverse childhood experiences is, I think, this, and if we think, well, it's, maybe it's too late for me. No, it's not, right? As she says, the impact of interventions for toxic stress may not be quite as dramatic in adults as it is in our kids, but it still can make a big difference. This might sound simple, but I cannot overstate this. The single most important thing is recognizing what the problem is in the first place. And boy, did reading this open my eyes to where some of my problems came from in the first place. It really has been a game changer. So I hope you will take a look at this. If you feel like if you scored anywhere near I did on the ACE questionnaire there, The Deepest Well, Healing the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity. You can order the paperback, but it's available on Kindle, which is how I got it. It's easy peasy. You can just download it. So really, really excellent stuff.